Great, hi everyone. I'm back again, without the Olympians this time. So my name is Amy, like Helen mentioned, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of my career path so far and maybe some non-traditional elements of it. And I think similar to the previous panel with Vincent and Tati, there's a lot of messages of like a growth mindset and sort of, you know, being able to enjoy life as it's going on instead of afterwards, and yeah, taking things one step at a time. So to start off, I'll have a lot of photos, sort of just to hopefully inspire you to think about, you know, broader ambitions. So the photo on the left here is me right after I graduated from college in 2020, and I was living on a really remote island in Alaska working for the Forest Service doing field work. And on the right here is me holding a penguin. That's a penguin under my arm with a GPS tracker, and that was a few years later in Antarctica. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I went from Alaska to Antarctica, but before that, we have to go back to the beginning, where, oh, that's interesting, the things didn't transfer, but that's all right. So in the green bubble, it should say Philadelphia. So I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. I had a pretty traditional childhood, I would say, for a child of Chinese immigrants. I played instruments, I was on the soccer team, I had an older brother who, I guess you could say I really honed my 斗嘴能力 with. Yeah, so I, you know, was growing up, I really loved being outside, but growing up in suburban Philadelphia, there weren't that many opportunities to like out west, for example, go to national parks and that sort of thing. So I went to college in Boston. Sorry, the graphics are kind of messed up for some reason. I'm not sure why. But I attended Harvard University. I studied environmental science. I was really involved with the student newspaper, the Harvard Crimson. And during college, as many of you may know or will soon know, summer internships is like a really big thing. So it's always like, what are you going to do during your summer? And a lot of my peers would go intern at a tech company or an investment bank. But for me, I knew that I wanted to sort of use that time to explore the world a little bit more. So I applied for research opportunities in places that I hadn't been able to travel to before. Sorry, the graphics continue to be messed up, but my first summer, freshman summer, I went to Hawaii where I did a National Science Foundation or NSF research experience for an undergraduate, and that is where they fund you to go to an institute and perform research as an undergrad. And so I went to the University of Hawaii in Honolulu, where I studied methane, benthic methane, and the microbial communities, and it was a really great opportunity. I learned how to do my own research. And then the next summer I was thinking about other cool places that I would get to go to, so then I went to Alaska. I actually went to this Arctic research station at 65 or 66 degrees north. It's in the middle of Alaska. You have to drive 10 hours on a gravel road to get there. It's called Tulloch Field Station, and there I really fell in love with the landscape and environment and nature that you can find in Alaska. And yeah, I was introduced to polar research for the first time, which is something that I hadn't had the ability to interface with prior. And the following summer, I continued to do research. This time I went back to Hawaii for an internship at NOAA, which you might have heard of. And there I was studying coral bleaching using drones and remote sensing. So a lot of various different types of research, sort of just jumping around a lot. I wrote my senior thesis using that research, and then it was time to graduate. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do post-grad, I was graduating in 2020, so it was like the start of COVID. I knew that I would love to go back to Alaska because it was a place that I fell in love with and was really happy in. So while my peers were, you know, applying to med school or moving to New York to work in banking, for example, I decided to move across the country back to Alaska. And so I lived there for almost 2 years, and during my time there, I worked for a lot of federal agencies. So I was working for the Forest Service, BLM, I was working for the USDA as well, doing a lot of field work because I wanted to combine the ability to develop outdoor skills with my career and maximize the amount of time I could be outside in nature. And so my job, honestly, for 2 years was pretty cool. Basically, all we did was hike around outside in like remote parts of Alaska, looking at plants. I was looking at trees, identifying species, that sort of thing. And yeah, I really learned a lot. I learned how to travel by helicopter, travel by boat, and traverse some pretty intense terrain, I guess. So these are just some photos of where some places that we got to go to, and this is a little collage. So sometimes we're working on the Tongass National Forest, which is the largest forest in the US, managed by the Forest Service, and also it's a temperate rainforest, so it's really wet and rainy there. So we got to wear these pretty heavy-duty boots here. You can see that they're like spiked on the bottoms, and that's to help us traverse like terrain there's a lot of logs, for example, and helps us not fall. Also got to haul a dead caribou across the tundra so that we could move it away from camp and not get eaten by a bear in the middle of the night. And just a lot of really incredible experiences that, in college I didn't think were possible. But yeah, I just, step by step discovered more and more different opportunities that I could take. Up top is just, a lot of bears, because Alaska's bear country, and you have to learn to protect yourself from that. I made a lot of really great friends and got to recreate a lot, so I developed my backpacking skills, and I'm kayaking in the bottom, and you can do a lot of fun trips that way. And I think another personal goal of mine was to get into bike packing, which is like where you do long distance biking, self-supported, so you're camping, you bring all your food with you. And so I got to do my first bike packing tour in 2021, and that was around the state of Alaska by myself, which was really difficult and challenging, but also very rewarding. So at that point in my life, I was like, okay, well, I could stay in Alaska forever. I think I would be pretty happy. I love it here. I have really good community. But I had also applied for other opportunities, and I ended up receiving a Fulbright fellowship to go do research in Norway. And so after close to 2 years, I was like, okay, I guess that sounds pretty cool, and I would like to go do that. So I moved everything halfway across the world, I guess, to Norway, where I studied and did my own research for about a year. And I was working on underwater robotics to study marine biology, basically. And but in my free time, and this is what I like to tell people, the real reason why I went to Norway was to learn how to ski, because that was something I didn't get to do growing up. So I learned how to cross-country ski, self-taught, very painful, and I also learned a little bit about downhill skiing, and also got to explore Norway, which is a beautiful country, if you haven't been. And so at that point, I really liked the research group I was working with, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'll keep staying here. But then, of course, theme emerging, something else came up, and I ended up getting this position as an early career biologist with a research group in San Francisco, and the team that I was working with studied penguins, specifically Adelie penguins, and specifically how their population changes in this one colony in Antarctica. And so I was like, okay, well that sounds pretty awesome, I would like to do that as well. So then I took that position, and as part of it, I got to deploy to Antarctica for 4 months for a field, for field work. And the question I get often is, how do you get there? So a lot of people know about how tourists will go from South America, from Chile, and take a boat down. But our site was actually on the other side of Antarctica, and so what we do is we fly into Christchurch on the South Island of New Zealand, and then from there we take a military cargo plane, and then we fly into Antarctica, and then from there we take a helicopter and ride about like 40 to 50 minutes to our field site. And so for 4 months, I was working with 2 to 4 other people in this landscape. So this is Cape Crozier, the penguin colony I was working at, and so that's me down there in the right-hand bottom corner. And as you can see, there's like these light patches, and then on those light patches, you might be able to make out like some dots. And so basically every one of those dots is a penguin. And so we were working in this penguin colony, Adelie penguin colony, that is one of the largest in the world. It's home to over 1 million penguins. And basically my job for 4 months was basically wake up, hike down to the colony, and like hang out with penguins all day. And that was pretty cool. It was really challenging as well, as you can imagine. We experienced hurricane force winds, which is not really fun, but also, yeah, just a lot of incredible experiences. Here are some more photos. So we had a tent. So we lived in tents, or we slept in tents, and we had like one small, very small heated communal space, and no running water. We had solar power for electricity, but we also, didn't really have that much internet connectivity. We had like maybe, I think like a gig a month, I think, on a really old computer. No showers because there's no running water. And yeah, but there are a lot of penguins. So just like penguins everywhere, hanging out with them all the time. And it was really cool to sort of see their like whole breeding cycle. That's me holding a baby penguin. I feel like they kind of look like dinosaurs. We also did some drone work to survey the colony. And on the top right corner, we cooked for ourselves, and that's me making dumplings on Chinese New Year for the team. And yeah, so after that, my plan was to go back to Norway. So I went back to Norway. I got my master's degree because it was pretty easy to do it with the university I'd been doing my Fulbright at. And in Norway, or when I went back for my master's, I knew that I wanted to go to this really far north chain of islands called Svalbard, which some may have heard of. And so as part of my master's, I received grant funding to go up to Svalbard and plan an expedition with some other of my peers, and we did some underwater, like under ice robotics and for my master's thesis, and that was a really great experience. And then at that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I was looking at opportunities, and the opportunity to come back to Antarctica. Messed up. But imagine in the bottom right-hand corner that you see the southernmost active volcano, that's Mount Erebus. And so I had taken a new role with the United States Antarctic Program. And so that is the part of the NSF that runs all of the US research and research support that goes on in Antarctica. So the environmental team, so we work with international environmental policy and also domestic, helping the US make sure that they're upholding environmental regulations that need to be upheld in through the international treaty that governs Antarctica. And so my job now is pretty cool. I work as an environmental engineer, but for part of the year I deployed to Antarctica, so I just came back from my second trip down there in February, and I'll be going back down this fall. And as part of my job, I get to go to all these really remote field sites and basically do environmental audits. So we get to go to like volcanoes and these other really incredible environmental landscapes. Up top is, you might have heard about the South Pole Telescope. They do a lot of really impressive astronomy work down there. And so that was also something, like when I first went down to Antarctica the first time, I didn't know people, would go to the South Pole and do work there. And then when I went down there, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I would like to go to the South Pole as well. And so 2 years later, I got to go spend a week down at the South Pole doing some work and, get to stand like at the literal bottom of the Earth, which is pretty cool. So I think the main takeaway here is sort of like at every step of this journey, of this path, which seems linear but isn't linear, I didn't know necessarily that like when I was in Hawaii that I could go to Alaska, and when I was in Alaska, that's where I heard about people going to Antarctica. And so I think sort of my hope that you take away from this story or this journey is that you should always keep your eye out for the next opportunity, even if it's maybe not something that, when you're thinking about what to do after college, is, in those career handbooks, because there's a lot more out there than a traditional path that, that a lot of your peers might be taking on. And yeah, just I would encourage you to sort of think outside of the box, and you never know where you might end up. Thanks. We might have like time for like a question, maybe. Yeah.
I was going to ask, during these expeditions, did you ever have trouble, juggling, relationships and, your social life? I also, thought about, I majored in zoology, and I thought about, doing a career path like this, or apparently applying for grad school, but, it seemed really interesting to me, and one of my, most, biggest fears is
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely hard to keep in touch with your friends like stateside or, you know, like in the real world, because you disappear off the grid for 4 months and then they're like, oh, she's just somewhere else. Like yeah, my friends, that's definitely a challenge. And I think also moving around a lot is very challenging because I have really good friends who are in Norway now, right, who I'm not going to be able to see anytime soon. I feel like as far as finding a fulfilling like social community, I think when you're in those remote, isolated environments, of course you can have horror stories where you're like, I really don't like the people I'm surrounded by, but I think more probably, you'll find that the people who are, you know, like the handful of people that you're working with, you become really close with them. So the people who I've done fieldwork with in the past, like, yeah, some of them are my closest friends now. So I think it's a mix, I would say. It's definitely challenging, you know, if you don't have internet to keep in touch with people, but also you'll probably be surrounded by people that you want to spend time with and who inspire you. So yeah, but yeah, happy to chat about it later too. Cool. Great. Thank you, everyone.